These are some of the first gunshots fired by Stephen Paddock from inside his suite at Mandalay Bay.
Call the police. Someone's firing a gun up here. Someone's firing a rifle on the 32nd floor down the hallway.
Building engineer Stephen Schuck used his radio to let hotel staff know about the terror unfolding on the 32nd floor.
It's at the end of the hallway.
In the early hours of October 2nd, 2017, a lone shooter, later identified as Stephen Paddock, fired several guns from the window of his room on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada, targeting the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival being held in an open-air venue across the street. Over 20,000 people were in the venue at the time. The attack began at 10:05 p.m. and concluded at 10:15 p.m., during which the gunman fired more than 1,100 bullets. 58 victims died from gunshot wounds sustained during the attack, and over 500 others were injured. About 1 hour after the shooting, the gunman was found dead in his hotel room from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The incident is, at this time, the deadliest mass shooting committed in the United States by a single individual.
A content analysis of the news coverage published by the New York Times and the Tribune Content Agency from October 2nd to October 3rd reveals that the two news agencies used similar and different techniques to frame the event and the ensuing debates surrounding political conflicts and responsibility in the aftermath of the mass shooting. Both sources attributed the event to the lone gunman who perpetrated the shooting, but the New York Times provided a more sympathetic view of the perpetrator. The sample used in our analysis also found that the New York Times focused its coverage on the gun control debate, specifically emphasizing the conflict of the issue, with conflict codes making up 29% of the codes given to New York Times corpus. By contrast, the Tribune Content Agency focused on the human interest angle of the event, with human interest codes accounting for nearly 27% of the corpus. The Tribune Content Agency also attempted to put an uplifting spin on many of these human interest stories, which expressed admiration for first responders and volunteers.
The New York Times discussion of Paddock often attempted to minimize his connections with guns and crime. He was framed as a retiree with no significant criminal history who liked to gamble but seemed to live a quiet life with his girlfriend, or as a normal guy and not an avid gun guy at all.
Not an avid gun guy at all. The fact that he had those kind of weapons is, like I said, he's a guy who lived in a house in Mesquite and drove down and gambled in Las Vegas. He did stuff, ate burritos.
Conversely, the Tribune Content Agency kept its description of the gunman bare and sterile, rarely deviating from naming the shooter and describing his actions. The standard formula reads, "The shooter, identified as 64-year-old resident Stephen Paddock of Mesquite, Nevada, unleashed gunshots from the 32nd floor of the nearby Mandalay Bay Hotel." The Tribune Content Agency refrained from commenting on any personal details of the shooter. The New York Times was more likely to engage in the debate surrounding gun control and frame the event within this conflict. One opinion editorial stated, "Whether there is much that can be done policy-wise is a conversation some will resist having and others will push for in the following days." While Sarah Huckabee Sanders of the Trump administration said,
I think that's something that we can talk about in the coming days and see what that looks like moving forward. I think one of the things that we don't want to do is try to create laws that won't create or stop these types of things from happening. I think if you look to Chicago, where you had over 4,000 victims of gun-related crimes last year, they have the strictest gun laws in the country. That certainly hasn't helped there, so I think we have to win that.
The Tribune Content Agency's focus on the human interest angle took the attention away from the shooter and the gun debate and placed it onto the moral anchors of the first responders and volunteers.
Teacher Sandy Casey was remembered by her partner as a woman who, quote, lived life to the fullest and made me the happiest man in the world.
Many eyewitnesses profiled in these pieces expressed admiration, saying, "They were the real heroes. They put their lives out there and it didn't matter what was coming at them, be it bullets at the concert or the bodies and all of the carnage at the hospital. They just stepped up and said, 'Bring it, let's go, we're here.'" The focus on the eyewitnesses' admiration for the morally upstanding first responders sharply contrasts the prevalence of debate and conflict found in the New York Times. Readers of the New York Times are more likely to be informed on the stances of gun control, while readers of the Tribune Content Agency are less likely to be informed on these issues but more likely to focus their attention on the victims and the moral implications of the shooting.